My in-laws forced me to sign a prenup. Now I'm richer than their entire bloodline, and they're begging to rip it up, while whispering to my wife to leave me for my fortune. Hello Reddit I plus here. When I married into my wife's family, I thought I was stepping into a life of partnership and support. What I didn't realize was that I was also walking straight into a battlefield of suspicion, class prejudice, and thinly veiled insults. 8 years ago, I was a 30-year-old man with nothing but ambition in my hands. My name's Julian, and back then, I was working long hours in a cramped sales office. I wasn't poor, but I wasn't secure either. The kind of guy who could keep the lights on, but had to think twice before treating himself to a steak dinner. That was when I met Camille, the woman who would later become my wife. She was 27 at the time, confident, sharp, and came from a family that could only be described as old money with new arrogance. Her parents, Harold and Genevieve, lived in a world of country clubs, charity galas, and vacation homes sprinkled across continents. They made their fortune 2 generations ago in shipping and banking, and they carried themselves like royalty in a republic. Camille, to her credit, wasn't like them. She fell in love with me for who I was, a man with drive, ideas, and big dreams, even if my bank account didn't yet match my ambition. The problem was, her parents never saw me that way. To them, I wasn't a man chasing a dream. I was a parasite waiting to leech off their daughter's wealth, and they never hesitated to remind me of it. When Camille and I announced our engagement, Harold sat me down in his study. I can still remember the heavy smell of leather and whiskey clinging to the air as he poured himself a glass, and said in that cutting tone of his, "Julian, before you marry my daughter, you will sign an agreement. It's not negotiable. We don't want fortune hunters in this family." It stung. Not because of the contract itself, I'm a practical man, I could live with paperwork, but because of what it symbolized. It was their way of saying I was never truly one of them, just someone they tolerated because Camille insisted on marrying me. The prenup was brutal. It declared that all assets would remain separate in the event of divorce. I couldn't touch a cent of her inheritance, trust fund, or family properties, and on top of that, there was a clause stating that if the marriage ended, I would owe repayment for every dime Camille, or her family, had ever contributed toward my living expenses during the years I was building my business. At the time, my company was nothing more than scribbles in a notebook and a prototype in my garage. Yes, Camille had supported me, and occasionally her parents slipped her allowances when things got tight, but to frame it as if I was a debtor signing an IOU for daring to dream, that cut deep. Still, for Camille's sake, I swallowed my pride and signed. We married at 31 and 28, respectively. The wedding was grand, mostly funded by her family, and I remember thinking how ironic it was that I was celebrating my union with a woman I adored, while simultaneously signing documents that treated me like a thief in waiting. But here's the thing about life. It has a way of flipping the script when people least expect it. I threw myself into my business. I had an idea for smart home electronics, devices that could sync seamlessly across a household without costing a fortune. For the first 2 years, it was brutal. Late nights, debt collectors, rejection after rejection from investors. Camille stood by me the entire time. Even when her parents sneered, she believed. By year 3, I landed a major distribution deal with a European retailer. By year 5, I had warehouses across 3 countries, patents under my name, and contracts that most tech startups would kill for. And by year 8, my net worth had quietly overtaken her entire family's. Suddenly, the gold digger they had forced into a prenup was wealthier than the very dynasty that tried to box him out. Now Harold and Genevieve can't stand it. They grit their teeth every time Forbes publishes another list featuring my company. They whisper behind Camille's back, trying to convince her that I'm greedy because I refused to tear up the prenup, the same one they shoved in my face. They've even tried to lure her into reconsidering her options, as if they could somehow manipulate her into leaving me and reclaiming her spot in their world of smug superiority. The irony? Camille laughs at them. She tells them plainly, "Julian built everything he has with his own hands. If anything, I'm lucky to be with him, not the other way around." But their desperation is getting louder. They host dinner parties where the conversation casually drifts toward prenups and inheritances. They drop hints that maybe Camille would have been happier if she'd married someone from her own circle. Meanwhile, I sit back and watch. I don't raise my voice. I don't tear up the contract. And I sure as hell don't share a cent of my pot of gold with them. Because I remember the day I sat in Harold's study, the taste of humiliation sharp in my throat, signing a paper that branded me an opportunist. Now, The only opportunists in the room are the ones begging me to reconsider, and I don't intend to. For a while, life was peaceful. Camille and I built our own world away from the shadow of her parents. We had a beautiful home by the lake, 2 kids who filled our lives with noise and joy, and a business empire that demanded my time, but rewarded me with freedom her family never thought I'd achieve. But peace never lasts when envy and pride are lurking in the background. It started subtly. One afternoon, Camille came home fuming. She had been visiting her parents, and during lunch, her mother, Genevieve, casually asked if Camille had ever thought about setting up a separate account, one that her parents could help her manage. Camille saw right through it. She told me later that her mother had leaned in with that rehearsed sympathy, the kind rich women use when they're about to insult you. "You never know, darling," Genevieve said. "What if one day Julian decides he doesn't need you anymore?" "Men change when they get rich," Camille told her, word for word. "Mother, Julian never changed when he had nothing. Why would he change now?" That should have shut things down, but it didn't. A few weeks later, her father Harold invited me out to his club for drinks. I was hesitant, but Camille encouraged me to go, hoping maybe he was finally trying to make amends. It wasn't amends. It was a performance. Harold spent half the evening reminiscing about when men knew their place, and then smoothly shifted the conversation toward my business. He asked about partnerships, about distribution rights, about whether I'd ever thought of bringing the family in. I laughed it off, but his tone sharpened. "Julian, don't forget who gave you a roof when you had nothing. Don't forget who made sure Camille kept food on the table while you played at business. You owe this family that word again." "Oh." I leaned back, looked him straight in the eye, and said, "I don't owe you a damn thing. If you really think I was a charity case, you'll be happy to know the prenup makes sure I can never touch a cent of your fortune. And guess what? I don't need it." That was the first time Harold actually looked rattled. From then on, the games began. First, it was gossip. Rumors started swirling at social gatherings. Whispers that I was funneling money into offshore accounts, that I was secretly planning to leave Camille, that I had mistresses in other cities. None of it was true, but Harold and Genevieve's circle of friends thrived on scandal, and they planted seeds wherever they could. Then came the more direct attacks. I got a call from my legal team one morning saying an anonymous party had filed complaints against my company. Accusations of labor violations, unsafe products, you name it, all baseless. We fought them off, but it drained time, money, and energy. And who just happened to bring up those very same accusations at Sunday dinner? With a smug little smirk, Genevieve. "Julian, darling, I hope those reports about your company aren't true. It would be such a shame for Camille and the children if everything you've built came crashing down." I wanted to slam my glass down, but Camille squeezed my hand under the table, her way of saying, "Don't give them the satisfaction." But the final straw came a year later. Camille and I got a letter from her parents' attorney. It was written in the most polite legal language possible, but the message was simple. Harold and Genevieve were contesting the fairness of the prenup. They claimed it was unreasonable that Camille couldn't access my assets if something ever happened to me, and that they, as her family, had a rightful interest in protecting her financial security. It was laughable. They were the ones who forced me to sign it in the first place. Now that I had eclipsed their wealth, they wanted the rules rewritten. Camille went ballistic. She drove to their mansion, kids in tow, and confronted them. According to her, the fight was explosive. Her father accused her of being blinded by love and said she was too naive to see that I was hoarding wealth. Her mother broke down crying, claiming I had brainwashed Camille against her own flesh and blood. Camille didn't hold back. She told them, in front of their household staff, "The only reason I'm not walking out of your lives entirely is because my children deserve to know their grandparents. But if you ever try to sabotage my marriage again, you'll lose me forever." After that, things went quiet. For about 6 months, we thought maybe they'd finally accepted reality. But manipulators don't stop. They just change strategies. Harold and Genevieve turned their attention to our kids. When they visited, they'd slip in little comments. "Wouldn't it be nice if your daddy shared his toys with everyone?" "Sometimes people don't know how to be fair, sweetie." We caught on quickly in limited visits. That was when they pulled their most desperate stunt yet. One morning, Camille got a frantic call from her mother. Harold had apparently collapsed during breakfast. Heart issues. An ambulance was on the way. Camille panicked. Of course, she wanted to rush over. But something in my gut told me to pause. We arrived at their mansion, only to find Harold perfectly fine, sitting in a chair with an oxygen mask. Doctors nowhere in sight. It was a performance, a ploy to guilt Camille into reconnecting. But here's the kicker. While we were distracted, Harold's attorney tried to deliver new paperwork, emergency revisions to Harold's will, conveniently ensuring Camille couldn't be cut out if something happened. In reality, it was a disguised attempt to rope her into signing documents that would entangle my assets with theirs. That was it. I'd had enough. I cut all business ties, blocked their lawyers, and told Camille we were done playing defense. If they wanted war, I was ready. We reinforced everything legally. Trusts, airtight contracts, protections for the kids. Every move I made from that day forward was to make sure Harold and Genevieve could never sink their claws into us again. And the best part? Camille was with me every step. She told me something that night I'll never forget. They thought the prenup would protect me from you, but the truth is, it protects us from them. 8 years ago, I signed that prenup with humiliation burning in my chest. Now, I look at it and smile. Because it's the very chain they forged that now keeps them locked out of everything they want, and I wouldn't change a thing. Time has a way of humbling even the proudest families. 5 more years passed, and during that time, Camille and I stayed focused on what mattered. Our kids, our marriage, and our work. My company had expanded into Asia and South America, and by my early 40s, I had become something Harold never thought possible, a household name in tech. The more successful I became, the more desperate Harold and Genevieve grew. They still had money, but compared to me, they were fading. Their influence at the country club dwindled. Their so-called friends no longer asked them for advice on investments. They asked me. That ate at Harold in particular. He had built his whole identity around being the man in control, the patriarch whose name meant power. Watching his unworthy son-in-law surpass him was like poison in his veins. But then came the inevitable. Harold's health really did decline. Not theatrics this time. Genuine illness. Within a year, he was in and out of hospitals. Genevieve, once the glamorous queen of social events, was suddenly reduced to an anxious caretaker. Camille visited with the kids, out of compassion more than loyalty. I went too, but more out of duty to her than anything else. And during those visits, I noticed something odd. Harold and Genevieve weren't as combative as before. In fact, they were almost sweet. Too sweet. One afternoon, while Harold was hooked up to machines and pretending to nap, Genevieve pulled Camille aside. I overheard enough to understand the pitch. Your father's will is being finalized, darling. It's only right that you and the children inherit the estate, but your husband's assets should be tied to it too. So everything remains in the family. Camille's response was sharp and immediate. Mother, the only thing that should remain in this family is honesty, and you two lost that a long time ago. Still, we weren't naive. We knew Harold and Genevieve's last play would come through their estate. And sure enough, when Harold finally passed, with Genevieve following just a year later, their will arrived with all the drama of a badly written soap opera. It left their mansion, their stocks, and their remaining fortune to Camille and her children. But hidden in the fine print was a clause. The inheritance would only be released if Camille agreed to merge her finances with mine, effectively undoing the very prenup they once forced on me. It was their final attempt at control, a legal ghost reaching from beyond the grave. Camille laughed when she read it. Do they really think they can win from the afterlife? We didn't need their money. My wealth had far surpassed theirs years ago. So we declined the inheritance. Let the mansion rot. Let the stocks dissolve. Their fortune wasn't worth our freedom. But here's where it gets interesting. Our kids saw it all. By then, our son was 15 and our daughter was 12, old enough to understand betrayal, manipulation, and loyalty. They asked questions. Lots of them. Why would Grandma and Grandpa do that? Why didn't they want you to be together? Why would they try to control us even after they were gone? Camille and I didn't sugarcoat it. We told them the truth. That wealth without integrity poisons people. That pride can make even family dangerous. And that respect must be earned, not inherited. Years later, when our son turned 18, he asked me something that made my chest tighten. Dad, when I build my own business one day, I don't want a prenup to protect me from my wife. I want a life that protects me from becoming like them. That was when I knew Harold and Genevieve had lost. Not just their legal battles, not just their wealth, but the war for legacy. Because the true inheritance we passed on to our children wasn't money. It was wisdom. It was the ability to see manipulation for what it was and choose love over greed. And that's worth more than any mansion or stock portfolio. As for me, I still keep a copy of that prenup in my safe. Not as a reminder of humiliation, but as a trophy. It's proof that even when the world stacks the deck against you, you can still build a fortune, a family, and a future on your own terms. And in the end, the gold they tried to guard so fiercely never even mattered. Because the richest thing I have is knowing they never truly beat me, and they never will.